The night a gang leader put his hand across a nurse's face inside a packed Montana bar, everyone in that room expected her to cry. She didn't. 3 seconds later, 280 pounds of muscle and cruelty hit the barroom floor so hard the glasses rattled behind the counter, and nobody, not the bartender, not the off-duty cop in the corner booth, not the dozen men who called themselves Derek Holloway's crew, could explain what they had just witnessed. The woman in the scrubs stood over him with her hands relaxed at her sides, breathing steady, eyes empty of panic. She looked like someone who had done this before. She looked like someone who had done much worse. If you wanted to know who Emily Voss really was, stay with me until the end of this story. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Copper Falls, Montana sat in a valley, so narrow that the mountains on both sides blocked the sun before 4 in the afternoon every winter. The town had one diner, 2 gas stations, a hardware store that doubled as a hunting supply shop, and a trauma center called Harmon Ridge Medical that the county had been trying to close for 11 years. The hospital kept surviving on federal funding and stubbornness. It wasn't a good hospital. It wasn't a bad one either. It was the only one within 60 miles, which meant it didn't need to be either. Emily Voss had worked its overnight trauma floor for 3 years. She had shown up in Copper Falls the same way she did everything, quietly. No references beyond a sealed personnel file forwarded from a staffing agency in Portland. No social media. No family visiting on holidays. She rented a small house at the edge of town on a gravel road, drove a 12-year-old pickup, and did her job with the kind of competence that made supervisors stop asking questions because the answers felt unnecessary. She was 34 years old and moved like someone older, not in body but in awareness, always positioned near exits, always aware of who stood behind her, always calm when everyone else was not. Her coworkers had opinions. Nurses always do. She never complained, said Tasha, the charge nurse on day shift, which was not a compliment the way she said it. Normal people complain. Something's off with her. She covered my Saturday last month without being asked, said Marcus, one of the orderlies, which was the closest thing to a character reference anyone offered. The ER attending, Dr. Paul Greer, had worked with Emily on 14 trauma calls over 3 years and once told the department head that she had better clinical instincts than any nurse he had worked with in 20 years of emergency medicine. He said it quietly, the way people say things they do not want to have to defend later. The department head, Dr. Lawrence Hubbard, filed the comment and moved on. He had other concerns. The hospital administrator, Richard Solt, had been making changes, cutting staff, renegotiating contracts, bringing in a consulting firm nobody on the clinical side had heard of called Meridian Outcomes Group. 3 senior nurses had resigned in 6 months. The ones who stayed were careful about what they said out loud. Emily said very little regardless. She worked her shifts. She drove home on the gravel road. She ran 8 miles every morning on the mountain trail before dawn, always at the same pace, always alone. On the occasional Friday night, she walked 4 blocks to the Ironclad, a bar that occupied the ground floor of what had once been a railroad depot, ordered a single drink, sat at the end of the counter, and watched the room without appearing to watch anything at all. That was where it started. The Friday in November was colder than usual. The parking lot outside the Ironclad held twice as many trucks as a normal weekend because a minor league hockey game had just ended 2 miles away, and the crowd had migrated in waves. By 8 o'clock, the bar was loud, warm, and operating at the outer edge of its fire capacity. Emily sat at her usual spot with a glass of club soda and lime. She ordered it at the bar because the alternative was explaining to people that she didn't drink, which invited more conversation than the order itself. She had been there 40 minutes when Derek Holloway walked in. She didn't know his name yet. She registered him the way she registered all potential complications. Male, early 40s. Significant physical mass across the shoulders and chest, moving with the practiced looseness of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. He had 4 men with him who functioned as a kind of mobile perimeter. People moved. Not dramatically, just the slight, unconscious shifts that happen in a space when something dangerous enters it. The bartender, a compact man named Gil, who had worked the Ironclad for 17 years, put on a professionally blank expression and started polishing a glass that was already clean. Holloway ordered a round for the 5 of them and surveyed the room the way people do when they want the room to know it's being surveyed. His gaze moved across the bar, touched Emily without stopping, moved on, then came back. Emily looked at her glass. "You're in my spot," Holloway said. She glanced up. He was standing 2 feet away, and his size was more apparent up close. 6'3", broad, the kind of bulk that didn't come from a gym but from physical work and years of eating whatever he wanted because nothing had ever stopped him. "The bar stools don't have names on them," Emily said. "They do tonight." She looked back at her glass. It was a clear, deliberate non-response, not aggressive, not frightened, just absent. She was done with the conversation. This was, she would reflect later, probably what made him angrier than anything else she could have done. "Hey!" He put his hand on her arm, not gently. She looked at his hand first, then at his face, and said nothing. "You deaf or just stupid?" he said. His friends had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle. The nearest cluster of bar patrons had developed a sudden intense interest in the far wall. "I'm going to ask you to remove your hand," Emily said. Her voice was level. Not polite, not frightened, not performing either quality. Just flat and direct. The way she might inform a patient that she was about to insert an IV. Holloway grinned. He had a face that had been broken at least twice. The nose angled slightly left, a ridge of scar tissue above the right eye. He was used to this particular moment, the moment after someone told him to stop, the moment when the telling became meaningless. "People like you don't scare anyone," he said, and then he hit her. It was an open-handed strike across the left side of her face, not a full-force blow. It was calculated, the kind of impact designed to humiliate rather than injure, to make a woman grab her face and go small. The sound of it carried. The bar went quiet in the uneven, dropping way of a room that has suddenly stopped pretending not to pay attention. Emily's head moved with the impact. She took 2 seconds with her face turned slightly away. Then she turned back. She looked at him the way a person looks at a problem they are deciding whether to address. Holloway raised his hand again. What happened next was fast enough that several witnesses would later struggle to agree on the sequence. Emily came off the bar stool as his arm descended. Her left hand intercepted his wrist, not grabbing but redirecting, using his own downward momentum. Her right elbow came up in a short, sharp arc that connected below his chin. She pivoted her entire body weight through the motion, and then her right hand was on the back of his neck, and she brought him down. Not a fall, a controlled placement. He hit the floor face first, and she had his right arm cranked at an angle behind him that made movement inadvisable before he fully understood he was down. The whole thing took under 3 seconds. The bar remained silent. Someone's drink was still making a slow spiral where it had been jostled on the counter. One of Holloway's men took half a step forward. "Don't," Emily said. She said it without turning her head. The man stopped. She held the position for 2 full seconds, long enough to be understood, then released his arm and stepped back. She picked up her glass. Her hands were completely steady. Holloway rolled over slowly, breathing hard, his face red and his eyes carrying the particular blankness of someone recalibrating a situation they had catastrophically miscalculated. Gil the bartender had his phone in his hand. He looked at Emily. She gave a small shake of her head, the kind that means, "I don't need that, but thank you." What she needed, and did not get, was for the next person to walk through the door to be anyone other than Officer Wade Pruitt. Pruitt had been with the Copper Falls Police Department for 9 years, which in a town this size meant he had worn grooves into his authority deep enough that he no longer noticed the shape of them. He was 46, soft in the middle, and arrived at situations already knowing what they were. He came in because someone at the bar had apparently called it in. Not the strike, not the assault, but the noise that came after. He looked at Holloway on the floor. He looked at Emily standing at the bar. He looked at Holloway's friends and registered something in their expressions that people like Pruitt register and file under manageable. "What happened here?" he said. It was not a question. "She attacked Derek," said one of Holloway's men, before anyone else could speak. "I defended myself," Emily said. "He struck me first." Several witnesses. "I'm asking him," Pruitt said, tilting his head towards the man who had spoken. Holloway was on his feet now, working his shoulder, his expression having reorganized itself into something between wounded dignity and threat. "Came at me for no reason," he said. "All I did was try to have a conversation." Emily looked at Gil. Gil was looking at the counter. She understood then what kind of scene this was. "Ma'am, I need you to step outside with me, Pruitt said. I'm the one who was assaulted. You're the one who put a man on the floor. He said it like it was the relevant fact, the only relevant fact. Anything else gets sorted out at the station if it needs to. She did not argue. Argument would change nothing here, and she knew it. She put cash on the counter for her drink, picked up her jacket, and walked out ahead of him. In the parking lot, under the yellow security light that turned everything the color of old newsprint, Pruitt told her that Derek Holloway was known to the department, a phrase that could mean anything, and in this case meant that the relationship was the kind police departments accumulate over years of looking the other way at exactly the right moments. He told her that if Holloway decided to press charges for the assault on his person, that would be the department's concern to investigate. He told her that whatever she thought she had coming to her, this was not the time or place to be a problem. He told her to go home. She went home. She drove the gravel road in the dark, parked the truck, and sat in the kitchen for a long time without turning on the lights. The side of her face where she had been struck had begun to ache dully. She pressed 2 fingers against it, checked the bone structure out of professional habit, and determined it was bruised but not fractured. She did not call anyone. There was no one to call. In the morning, she went to work. She was 20 minutes into her shift when the charge nurse told her that Richard Solt wanted to see her in his office before she started rounds. Tasha delivered this news with her eyes slightly averted, which told Emily everything the words did not. Solt's office was on the administrative floor, removed from the clinical areas by enough distance that the people in it never had to smell the hospital. He was 58, with the particular tidiness of a man who had spent his career in administration, everything on his desk at right angles, his suit pressed with the precision of someone who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He had already heard. Of course he had. I've been briefed on the incident at the Ironclad last night, he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk without looking at it. Emily sat. Emily, the hospital has a conduct standard that extends beyond the walls of this building. He folded his hands on the desk. A member of our nursing staff physically assaulting a civilian. I was struck first. There's bar camera footage and at minimum 6 witnesses. Solt's expression didn't shift. The optics of this are what they are. A nurse with the kind of, he paused, choosing the word, capability you displayed last night. It raises questions about what kind of employee we have working in a patient care environment. Emily looked at him steadily. Are you saying that because I defended myself, I'm unsuitable to care for patients? I'm saying that Harmon Ridge Medical is in a period of transition, and we need staff whose conduct, in all environments, reflects the values we're trying to. I need you to say the actual thing you're saying. He let a silence develop. It was a practiced silence, the kind administrators use to make the person across from them fill the space with concessions. Emily did not fill it. We're letting you go, he said finally. Effective today. You'll receive your last 2 weeks as severance. I'd encourage you to think of this as an opportunity to. You don't have to encourage me to think of it as anything, Emily said. She stood up. I'll clear my locker. She walked out of his office, down the administrative corridor, and into the elevator. In the elevator, alone, she leaned against the back wall for exactly 4 seconds. Then the doors opened and she walked out and finished her exit, like someone who had done difficult things in difficult circumstances and understood that feeling them fully was a luxury for later. She was in the parking lot, box of locker contents under her arm, when Marcus the orderly jogged out after her. This is garbage, he said, slightly out of breath. Everyone knows it. Tasha filed a complaint. Don't, Emily said. Not unkindly. It won't help and it might hurt you. Dr. Greer is furious. Dr. Greer is an employee. She unlocked the truck. Tell him I said thank you for the 3 years. Where are you going to go? She looked at him for a moment. Marcus was 26, earnest, the kind of person who believed that being right about something was a form of protection. She had been 26 once, and she had believed similar things, briefly, before the world revised her understanding of how protection actually worked. I'll figure it out, she said. She drove home. She put the box on the kitchen table. She stood at the window and looked at the mountains for a long time, and the mountains did not offer anything back. She was still employed in her thinking, running contingencies, next steps, whether to fight the termination or let it go, when the sound came. Not close, maybe 2 miles east on Route 9, But in the mountain silence it carried, a hard percussive bang, followed by the sustained groan of something large losing structural integrity, followed by a secondary impact that shook the window glass. She was already moving before she consciously decided to move. She grabbed the go-bag she kept in the hall closet, old habit, never fully abandoned, and was in the truck in 40 seconds. She hit Route 9 heading east and saw the smoke column rising before she rounded the bend. When the scene came into full view, she stopped the truck in the middle of the road and processed it. Military convoy. 4 vehicles, 2 HMMDVs and 2 larger transport trucks, the kind with reinforced frames and military markings. The lead HMMWV had gone off the road on a curve where the guardrail was inadequate for the grade and had rolled twice before stopping against the rock face. The second transport was jackknifed across both lanes, its cab crushed where the trailer had swung into it. The third vehicle was burning at the rear. She could see figures moving, some moving wrong, the lurching, compensating motion of people who were injured and running on adrenaline, and at least 3 that were not moving at all. She pulled over, grabbed the bag, and ran. The first person she reached was a soldier in full field gear who had made it 50 feet from the second transport before his legs gave out. GSW to the upper left thigh. No, not GSW. Shrapnel from the secondary impact. A jagged piece of chassis metal lodged laterally. The blood pressure in the wound telling her the femoral had been nicked but not severed. "Stay with me," she said. "I need your belt." "Who are—" "Belt. Now." He gave her the belt. She had the tourniquet improvised and seated above the wound in 11 seconds. Applied pressure, checked his airway, checked his pupils. Responsive, both. And told him not to move his left leg. Then she moved to the next. There were 8 injured soldiers across the 4 vehicles, and 3 of them were in critical condition. She worked with the systematic efficiency of someone who had triaged mass casualty events in conditions worse than this, in places she was not permitted to name, and she moved between them, calling out status assessments to herself because there was no one else to call them out to. Other drivers had stopped. A man in a flannel jacket tried to help, and she directed him, "Hold pressure here. Don't let go. Keep talking to him. Yes, it matters that you keep talking." A woman with a first aid kit from her car offered it, and Emily took it and used half of it in 40 seconds. She heard the sirens when they were still a long way off, coming from both directions. The county emergency services from Copper Falls, and distantly, a different pitch, something heavier. She was working on a soldier with a probable cervical injury, manual stabilization, nothing more, until equipment arrived, speaking low and steady to keep him from moving. When she became aware that someone was standing close behind her. Military posture, she registered it without looking. Still, present, watching with attention that had a different quality than a bystander's. "Ma'am." She kept her hands on the soldier's neck. "In a minute." "Ma'am, are you medical personnel?" "Trauma nurse." A pause. "Former trauma nurse. Hold this." She guided the newcomer's hands into position, large hands, steady, took direction without hesitation. She glanced up. Army sergeant. Full combat kit, which meant the heavy vehicles she had heard but not seen yet were his. The secondary response, not county. "What unit are these men from?" she asked. "That's classified." "I need to know their blood types and any—" "Ma'am." His voice changed. Not louder, quieter, actually. He was looking at her go-bag, which was open on the ground beside her, and at the way her hands moved, and at the tourniquet she had placed on the first soldier, the one that any trauma professional would recognize was applied with military standard precision, not civilian emergency training. "What did you say your name was?" She didn't answer because the ambulances arrived and she moved toward them to transfer information. She gave the paramedics a full rundown on each patient, injury, intervention, status, priority sequence, and they took it without question because she was speaking in the cadence of someone who knew what she was doing, and in emergencies, competence is its own credential. She was still giving the rundown when she heard it. Behind her, from the direction of the overturned HMMWV, the sergeant was on a radio. She had good ears. She had always had good ears. "Need you to confirm a personnel record," he was saying. "Female, mid-30s, trauma skills beyond civilian certification. Name?" And here he looked directly at her across the distance, and she realized he had read it off the ID clipped to her go-bag strap. "Name is Voss. First initial E." She kept talking to the paramedics. "Copy that," the sergeant said behind her. Then nothing for 22 seconds. Then, Say that again." She finished the briefing. She handed off the last patient and stepped back from the controlled chaos of the loading sequence. She had blood on her jacket and hands, and she became aware of both for the first time. The sergeant walked toward her with a different expression than the one he had started with. The professional blankness was still there, but something had opened behind it. The particular adjustment that happens on a person's face when information they have been given does not fit the frame they were using to organize the world. "Ms. Voss," he said. "I should go," she said. "I'm going to need you to stay here for a few minutes." "I'm not needed anymore. Your paramedics are—" "I'm not asking because of the paramedics." He said it carefully. "The record that just came back on your name, it's flagged at a clearance level I don't have. That doesn't happen often. It has actually never happened to me before." He paused. "There are people coming who are going to want to talk to you." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the mountains, which were doing what they always did. "How long?" she said. "Maybe 40 minutes?" She nodded once. She sat down on the tailgate of the nearest undamaged truck and looked at her hands and waited, and the things she had buried for 3 years began to surface the way things do when the circumstances have finally become exactly what you tried to prevent. 40 minutes. She had spent longer than that in situations with no exit at all. She could wait. They came in 2 vehicles, a black government SUV and a military staff car with no markings beyond the branch insignia, which told Emily more than markings would have. Unmarked meant the unit wasn't meant to be placed. The staff car meant someone with rank had made the trip personally, rather than sending a representative, which meant whatever was in her file had moved people who did not move easily. She stayed on the tailgate. She had learned a long time ago that standing up when authority arrived was a form of deference that cost you before the conversation even started. 4 people got out. 2 were in uniform: Army, senior ranks, a lieutenant colonel, and a major she didn't recognize. 1 was in civilian clothes with the particular cut and bearing of federal law enforcement. The 4th was a woman in her late 50s in a dark coat who walked with a slight limp and who Emily recognized immediately and completely, the way you recognize someone who reshaped the direction of your life. Colonel Renata Marsh. She was older. The hair was fully silver now and cut short in a way it hadn't been before. But the way she moved, the economy of it, nothing wasted, every step deliberate, that hadn't changed at all. Marsh walked directly to Emily and stopped 3 feet away and looked at her for a moment without speaking. It was not an unkind look. It was the look of someone doing a rapid and honest accounting. "You look terrible," Marsh said. "I've had a complicated 24 hours, Emily said. "I heard." Marsh turned slightly and looked at the crash site, at the soldiers being loaded, at the blood on Emily's jacket. "And then this. I was in the area." "You were always in the area when something needed doing." Marsh said it without sentimentality, which was the only way either of them would have been comfortable hearing it. She turned back. "We need to talk." "I figured." "Somewhere that isn't a highway shoulder." Emily got off the tailgate. The lieutenant colonel had been watching this exchange with the careful expression of someone witnessing a conversation whose context they cannot fully access. The federal agent had his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on Emily with the specific attentiveness of law enforcement building a read. "Who's the civilian?" Emily asked quietly, for Marsh's ears. "His name is Garrett Lowe. He's out of the DOJ field office in Helena. He's been working something for about 8 months, and your name came up in it 3 weeks ago." Marsh paused. "He was going to come find you eventually. I decided I'd rather it happen with me present." Emily processed that. "That's not reassuring." "It's not meant to be reassuring, it's meant to be honest." Marsh started walking toward the staff car. "Come on, I'll explain what I can." What Marsh could explain, it turned out, was more than Emily had expected and less than she needed. They sat in the back of the staff car, Marsh, Emily, and Lowe, with the lieutenant colonel up front and the divider up, parked on the shoulder 200 yards from the crash scene. The heater was running. Emily's jacket was still blood-stiff, and she was aware of it in the enclosed space, but nobody commented. Lowe went first. He was mid-40s, economical with words, the kind of agent who had learned that the less he explained, the more the person across from him filled the silence. He opened a folder on his knee and turned it toward Emily. The top document was a corporate filing. The company name was Kestrel Strategic Partners, registered in Delaware, operational address in Billings. Emily looked at it without touching it. "Familiar?" Lowe asked. No. It's a defense consulting firm, contracts with the Army, primarily logistics and security infrastructure for domestic installations. He turned to the next page, a org chart, several names, one of them highlighted. This name. Emily looked at the highlighted name. Richard Solt. She kept her face still. He's the administrator at Harmon Ridge Medical. He's also on the board of Kestrel Strategic Partners, has been for 4 years. Lowe turned another page. Kestrel has been running a secondary operation through Harmon Ridge, using the hospital's procurement system to move medical supply contracts in ways that benefit Kestrel's subsidiary accounts. It's a layering scheme, complex enough to survive a routine audit, not complex enough to survive a targeted one. He paused. The reason we have a targeted one is that 3 months ago, Kestrel filed paperwork for a contract extension that involved equipment specifications for a specialized trauma unit attached to an installation in this region. Which installation? Emily said. That's still classified. He looked at her steadily. But it's the same installation that Convoy was resupplying. Emily looked at the org chart again. The highlighted name. 3 years she had worked in Solt's hospital, and she had registered him as a bureaucratic obstacle, self-interested, political, the kind of administrator who protected the institution's image at the expense of its function. She had not registered him as anything more than that. She thought about the sealed personnel file, the staffing agency in Portland, the steps she had taken when she arrived in Copper Falls to be unreachable by anyone who might know what she used to be. "Why did my name come up in your investigation?" she asked. Lowe glanced at Marsh. Marsh said, "That's where it gets into territory that belongs to me." Lowe closed the folder and looked out the window, which was the professional courtesy of a man allowing a conversation to happen without him. Marsh shifted to face Emily more directly. She had the manner of someone who had delivered difficult information many times and had learned that the delivery style mattered less than people assumed. What mattered was not softening it into something unrecognizable. "After what happened with your unit," Marsh said, "the investigation into the operational failure identified 3 points of compromise. One was internal. You know that part. That's the part that ended your service. The second was a communications intercept that we traced and plugged. The third one," she stopped. "The third one we couldn't source. We knew money had moved. We knew someone with logistics access had provided route information that shouldn't have been available to non-cleared personnel. We couldn't find the entry point." Emily was very still. "Kestrel Strategic Partners existed in a different form 4 years ago," Marsh continued. "Different name, similar structure. Garrett's team found the financial thread 3 months ago. The route information that compromised your unit's final operation. It passed through a shell account that connects, with some patience and a good forensic accountant, to the same network that Kestrel uses now." The car was quiet except for the heater. "Solt," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "We don't have enough for that specifically yet. We know the network. We're still building who within it had operational knowledge." Marsh looked at her carefully. "But the point is that your disappearance from the service record was logged as a voluntary separation. It wasn't flagged to any of the people who were looking at the network because there was no visible connection. When Garrett's team ran a proximity analysis on everyone currently within 50 miles of the installation and found a former special operations medic working at a hospital with Kestrel ties, it flagged," Emily said. "It flagged." Emily looked at her hands, the blood under her fingernails that she hadn't been able to clean in the field. "I was fired this morning," she said, "by Solt. He used last night at the bar as the excuse." Marsh and Lowe exchanged a look that lasted less than a second. Lowe had the folder open again. "Last night," Lowe said. "Tell me about last night." She told them. All of it. Holloway, the bar, Pruitt's response, the termination. She told it the way she wrote incident reports, factual and sequenced, without editorializing. When she finished, Lowe wrote 3 things in his notebook and circled one of them. "Derek Holloway," he said. "Has anyone told you what he does for a living?" "No?" "He runs private security contracts in this region. His company is called Titan Ground Services." Lowe turned to a page in the folder. "Titan Ground Services has a subcontracting relationship with Kestrel Strategic Partners." The heater ran. Outside, the last ambulance was pulling away. Emily sat with that for a moment. The bar, the strike, Pruitt's response, the termination the next morning. She had read it as opportunism, a man who liked to intimidate women, a corrupt cop covering for someone he owed. an administrator using a convenient excuse, and it was all of those things. But it had also been, she now understood, a deliberate removal. "He knew who I was," she said. "We believe Solt ran your name at some point in the last several weeks," Lowe said. "We don't know what he found or didn't find, but the timing of your termination the morning after an incident that gave him cover, he left it open." "He may not have known your full history," Marsh said, "but he knew enough to want you gone." Emily nodded slowly. She was angry, but it was the cold, functional kind of anger, not the kind that interfered with thinking, but the kind that clarified it, burned off everything secondary and left the structure of the problem clean and visible. "What do you need from me?" she said. Yeah. What they needed, it turned out, was both simpler and more complicated than she could have predicted. Lowe needed a witness with direct knowledge of Solt's operational decisions at Harmon Ridge. Someone who had worked inside the hospital long enough to speak credibly to the pattern of choices that had thinned staffing, redirected procurement, and created the conditions that benefited Kestrel's billing structure. Emily had 3 years of it. She had noticed, because she noticed things, and she had filed observations in her memory the way she filed everything, dated, sequenced, specific. What Marsh needed was harder to say in the car, with Lowe present. She said it anyway. "The unit from the convoy," Marsh said. 3 of those 8 soldiers are going to need surgical intervention in the next several hours. Harmon Ridge is the closest facility. The trauma team there is," she paused, choosing the word, "reduced." "They fired half the senior nursing staff in the last 6 months, Emily said. "I know, I read Garrett's file." Marsh looked at her directly. "Dr. Greer is there. He requested you by name 20 minutes ago when the paramedics called ahead with the patient profiles. He doesn't know you were terminated this morning." "Solt does?" "Solt is going to have a difficult few hours," Marsh said, and the way she said it left the shape of what was coming visible without requiring specification. "But between now and when that becomes official, the hospital administration is going to try to prevent you from entering the building." "You could compel entry," Emily said. "I could. It would take time I'd rather not spend." Marsh's voice was even. "I'm asking if you'll go back voluntarily. With us. Right now." Emily looked out the window at the road, at the mountains above the tree line, at the sky that was moving toward the flat gray of late afternoon. She had driven that gravel road home this morning with a box of her belongings and thought she was done with Harmon Ridge Medical in all the ways a person can be done with a place. Now Marsh was asking her to walk back through the front door with federal and military authority at her back, which was a different kind of return entirely. It was also, she recognized, not actually a choice. There were soldiers in those ambulances who needed a specific combination of skills, and she was the combination. Everything else was just the particular texture of the circumstances. "Let me clean up," she said. "I can't walk into a trauma bay with someone else's blood on my hands." Harmon Ridge Medical was 40 minutes from the crash site. They made it in 28, which told Emily something about what Marsh had communicated to the staff car's driver before they left. The hospital entrance was visible from the parking lot, and so was the figure standing just inside the automatic doors. Richard Solt, in his pressed suit, with 2 security guards flanking him at a distance that indicated they had been positioned rather than arrived independently. He had received some kind of alert. Of course he had. A hospital administrator with Kestrel ties and reasons to keep Emily out would have any number of tripwires in place. Marsh got out of the car first, then Lowe. Then the lieutenant colonel, who had not spoken to Emily directly, but who had the particular posture of someone whose rank functioned as an argument before he opened his mouth. Emily got out last. Solt pushed through the automatic doors and came 4 steps forward, stopping when he registered the full composition of the group. The uniforms, the federal bearing of Lowe, the general quality of authority in front of him. "Ms. Voss was separated from this hospital this morning," Solt said. His voice was controlled, administrative. "She is not authorized to be on hospital property." "She's with us," Marsh said. "That doesn't change hospital." "Mr. Solt." Lowe reached into his jacket and produced a document. He extended it without stepping forward, making Solt come to him. "That's a federal order authorizing the temporary reintegration of Emily Voss as a qualified trauma specialist for the duration of the current medical emergency. It's been signed. Read the signature line if you'd like." Solt looked at the document. Something moved through his expression. Not fear exactly, but the precursor to it, The moment when a man who has operated inside a comfortable structure feels the structure shift. I'd also like to inform you, Lowe continued in the same conversational register, that as of approximately 40 minutes ago, a warrant review for Kestrel Strategic Partners and its associated accounts was authorized by a federal judge in Helena. I mention this in the interest of transparency. Solt went very still. The trauma bay, Marsh said to Emily. Dr. Greer is expecting you. Emily walked past Solt without looking at him. One of the security guards stepped back on his own before she reached him. The trauma bay was controlled chaos at the exact frequency she knew. Multiple patients, competing demands, the particular percussion of monitors and voices and equipment that sounded like disorder and functioned like a system. Dr. Paul Greer was at the central station, a compact man of 50 with reading glasses pushed onto his forehead that he never remembered to actually use for reading. He looked up when Emily came through the door, and his expression did something quick and complicated. "You're here," he said. Apparently, she was already tying her gown. "Talk to me." He talked. 3 of the 8 soldiers had injuries requiring intervention beyond what the paramedics had stabilized. The first was the shrapnel wound she had tourniqueted on the highway, which had been properly addressed in transport but now needed surgical evaluation for vascular involvement. The second was a chest injury, 2 ribs, and a probable hemothorax that needed a chest tube at minimum. The third was the cervical case, which remained in manual stabilization and needed imaging before anyone could determine the path forward. Emily moved to the chest injury first because the timeline on a hemothorax was the least forgiving. The patient was a young woman, mid-20s, with corporal's insignia and the gray-white color of someone whose body was working very hard to compensate for blood in the chest cavity. She was awake, which was better than the alternative, and she tracked Emily's approach. "I'm Emily Voss," Emily said, pulling on gloves. "I'm going to take care of you. What's your name?" "Ruiz," the soldier said. Her voice was tight, pain and effort. "Okay, Ruiz. I need you to breathe as normally as you can and tell me if anything I do makes the left side worse." She listened to the chest, percussed it, confirmed the hemothorax, and called for the chest tube setup. The respiratory tech handed her the tray and she worked, efficient and precise, talking to Ruiz throughout in the low continuous way that kept patients from going somewhere dark, while you did something uncomfortable to their bodies. She was aware, in her peripheral attention, that the sergeant from the highway was standing in the doorway of the trauma bay. He had cleaned up, but was still in uniform. He was watching her work with the same expression he had worn on the highway, the one that had begun as professional assessment and had become something else. His name, she would learn later, was Sergeant First Class David Reyes, and he had been on the radio in the parking lot for reasons that went beyond confirming her personnel record. She got the chest tube placed. The hemothorax began to drain, measured, visible progress, the kind of outcome that only looks routine if you have done it enough times to know how wrong it can go. Ruiz's color began to improve in increments. Her breathing eased from the tight, effortful rise and fall of compensation to something approximating normal. "Good?" Emily asked. "Better," Ruiz said. "Yeah, better." Emily moved to the next patient, then the next. The trauma bay ran for 90 minutes at a sustained intensity that burned through the staff in layers, the kind of multi-patient load that exposed exactly how thin Harmon Ridge's staffing had become. How many positions had been left vacant or filled with agency nurses who were competent but unfamiliar? How much the reduction in senior staff had carved into the unit's functional capacity. She ran 3 interventions in 90 minutes. She called consults, argued 2 of them out of the wrong decision, and directed the nursing staff with the specific authority of someone who knew what she was doing and had no interest in the politics of whether she was supposed to be there. When it was over, when all 3 critical patients were stable and moving toward the next phase of care, she stood at the sink washing her hands and became aware of how tired she was. Not the sudden crash of exhaustion, but the deep background hum of a body that had been running on acuity for too many consecutive hours. She became aware also that she was not alone in the scrub room. Reyes had come in quietly. He leaned against the far wall with his arms crossed, and he waited until she turned the water off. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "That tourniquet you put on Specialist Dalton on the highway. The placement, the tension." He paused. That's not nursing school. That's not even a good paramedic course. Emily dried her hands without responding. I served 8 years, Reyes said. I've seen that technique applied correctly maybe 4 times. Twice by combat medics who'd been in the sandbox for 3 deployments. He looked at her steadily. I've been trying to figure out who you are since Route 9. I told you, former trauma nurse. I talked to Colonel Marsh while you were in the bay. His voice was even, not accusing. She didn't tell me much. She didn't need to. He straightened off the wall. He stopped, started again, something imprecise happening on a face built for precision. Dalton has a 7-year-old. I know because he shows everyone the pictures whether they ask or not. He looked at her directly. So, thank you. Emily looked at him for a moment. The scrub room was small and white and smelled like antiseptic. How's his femoral? She said. Reyes understood that she was not good with this part. Surgeon says no permanent vascular damage. He'll be walking in 6 weeks. Good. She tossed the paper towel. That's good. She pushed through the scrub room door. In the hallway, Marsh was waiting with Lowe, and the expression on Marsh's face had shifted toward something that was not quite urgency, but was in that neighborhood. Solt left the building 20 minutes ago, Lowe said. We have someone on him, but I want you to know. Emily nodded. There's also something else. Marsh held out a tablet. On it was a still image from the bar's security camera, the ironclad's exterior camera, angled to cover the parking lot, timestamped 9:47 p.m., the previous night. It showed Derek Holloway outside the bar, after the incident, on his phone, and it showed clearly who he was standing next to, Officer Wade Pruitt, the conversation apparently already in progress when the timestamp began. They knew each other before that night, Marsh said. Pruitt called Holloway when the first report came in. He didn't respond to an incident. He arranged one. Emily looked at the image, the parking lot, the yellow light. She had stood in that same frame less than 24 hours ago and been told to go home. The bar footage from inside is being pulled under the warrant, Lowe said. Holloway's assault on you, Pruitt's conduct, the whole sequence. It's going to DOJ by end of day. Emily handed the tablet back. She thought about the gravel road, the dark kitchen, the box on the table. There's still something I don't understand, she said. Solt fires me this morning. Fine, that's the removal. But why Holloway and the bar? Why set that up the night before? What did it accomplish? Lowe and Marsh exchanged the look again. We think, Lowe said carefully, that someone ran your name not because they knew who you were, but because they wanted to know why your file was sealed. A sealed file on a trauma nurse raises questions. Holloway may have been sent to assess you, to see how you responded to threat. And when I responded the way I did, it confirmed whatever they suspected, Marsh said. Solt terminated you before you could become a problem he couldn't manage. She paused. He may not have understood the full picture, but he understood you were a risk. Emily stood in the hallway for a moment, assembling this. She had spent 3 years in Copper Falls being nothing, being the quiet nurse on the overnight floor, the woman who ran the mountain trail before dawn, the person who sat at the end of the bar and watched without being watched. She had been so careful. And someone had looked at a sealed file and sent a man with 280 pounds and a willingness to hit women to a bar on a Friday night to take her measure. The anger she felt was not cold anymore. It was something more specific. She was about to speak when a junior nurse came fast around the corner from the direction of the trauma bay and stopped when she saw the group. Ms. Voss, she said, slightly out of breath. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's Ruiz, the corporal. She's asking for you. A beat. She's been asking for the last 10 minutes, but everyone said you were... She glanced at the federal agents, rerouted, occupied. Is she in distress? No, she's... The nurse hesitated. She says she needs to tell you something. She said it's about the convoy. Emily looked at Marsh. Marsh's expression had gone very still. Go, Marsh said. Emily followed the junior nurse back down the corridor toward the trauma bay, and behind her she could hear Marsh begin to say something to Lowe in a low, clipped voice. Something Emily didn't catch because she was already moving, because the particular weight of she needs to tell you something about the convoy had landed with the specific gravity of information that did not wait. The room with Ruiz was at the end of the ward, quieter than the trauma bay, the monitors running at their steady background cadence. Ruiz was elevated slightly in the bed, her color still pale, but nothing like the gray-white of the highway. She tracked Emily's entry with dark eyes that were alert and measuring. Emily pulled the chair to the bedside and sat, which put them at eye level. Not a clinical position, a listening one. "You wanted to tell me something," Emily said. Ruiz looked at the door, the checking look. Emily stood, closed it most of the way, and sat back down. "The convoy wasn't a random routing," Ruiz said. Her voice was low and deliberate. "We were told last minute, change of route. Came down from logistics. Internal order, signed off. But Sergeant Reyes flagged it before we rolled because the new route went through that mountain curve, and he'd driven it before and knew the grade was wrong for our load weight." She paused to breathe, the chest tube pull still pulling when she moved air. "Command overrode the flag, said the order was valid." Emily was very still. 2 hours later, we're in the ditch," Ruiz said. "Reyes was right about the grade. We went in on the curve exactly where he said we would." She looked at Emily directly. "That route change came from a logistics office that interfaces with civilian contractors. I saw the order signature before we rolled." She reached toward the bedside table and picked up her phone. Cracked screen, locked with a code, she entered one-handed. She turned it to face Emily. On the screen was a photograph of a printed order form. Blurred at the edges from a hasty shot, but the center was clear. The signature line. Emily looked at the name on the signature line, and the ground shifted under everything she thought she understood about the last 24 hours. The name was not Soltz. The name on the signature line was Colonel Warren Steck. Emily looked at the photograph for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Ruiz. "You know that name," Ruiz said. It was not a question. "Where did you get this?" "Photographed the order before we rolled. Reyes told us years ago, document everything you think is wrong before it becomes a problem, because after it becomes a problem, it disappears." Ruiz took a careful breath around the chest tube pull. "I almost didn't show you. I don't know you." "Why did you?" "Because Reyes trusts you, and because—" Ruiz stopped, looked at the middle distance for a moment in the way people do when they are deciding how honest to be. "Because 6 of my people are in this hospital, because someone changed our route. I want that to mean something." Emily stood. She needed to move, needed the physical act of standing to absorb what she was processing, because Colonel Warren Steck was not a random name on a logistics form. Warren Steck had been the installation commander at Forward Operating Base Calvert when Emily's unit had run their final operation, the one that had ended with 3 of her people dead, 2 captured, and Emily herself extracted under circumstances that were never fully explained in any document she was permitted to read. Steck had been the officer who signed off on the intelligence assessment that sent them in. He had also been, she had believed based on incomplete evidence and subsequent investigation, the officer who either negligently or deliberately failed to flag the compromise that betrayed them. Nothing had ever been proven. Steck had retired with full honors 18 months after the operation. She had tracked him from a distance, not obsessively, but the way you keep a peripheral eye on something you cannot resolve. Last she knew, he was consulting. Private sector, defense adjacent, Kestrel Strategic Partners. She took the phone from Ruiz's hand. "I need to show this to the people in the hall." "That's my only copy." "I'll have it returned to you in 10 minutes. Emily looked at her directly. "You did the right thing." Ruiz made a sound that was not quite dismissive and not quite accepting. "Just make it count," she said. Marcia's reaction to the photograph was 3 seconds of absolute stillness, followed by a turn to Lo that communicated, without words, that whatever framework they had been operating inside for the last several hours had just been replaced by a larger one. Lo looked at the image. He looked at it for a long time. He had the practiced non-expression of a federal agent, but something moved behind it. The specific adjustment of a person whose investigation has just expanded beyond the parameters they built it to fit. "Steck is on Kestrel's advisory board," Lo said quietly. "Listed as a defense strategy consultant. I knew his name from the filing. I didn't—" He paused. "His connection to you wasn't in what I had." "It wouldn't be," Marsh said. Her voice was flat. "That part of Emily's record is sealed above your clearance level." She looked at Emily. "You think the route change was deliberate?" "I think a logistics order signed by Warren Steck that routes a military convoy through a mountain grade that was flagged as unsafe for the load weight, resulting in a crash that injured 8 soldiers. I think the word deliberate is the minimum accurate description." "To what end?" Lowe asked. Emily thought about it, working through the logic because the answer mattered. You couldn't respond correctly to the wrong threat. The convoy was resupplying the installation that Kestrel contracts with. If there's an active DOJ investigation into Kestrel's billing through Harmon Ridge, what does a disrupted resupply accomplish? Marsh said it before Emily finished the thought. Delays the installation's operational capacity, buys time. More than that, Emily said. A crashed military convoy generates incident reports, investigation protocols, interdepartmental communication, all of which creates noise that an active financial investigation has to compete with for bandwidth and attention. She looked at Lowe. How close are you to having what you need? Lowe was quiet for a moment. 3 weeks? Maybe 2 if the warrant review moves quickly. Steck knows the investigation exists, Emily said. I don't know how, but that signature is not the action of someone who doesn't know he's being looked at. It's the action of someone who is trying to make the next 2 weeks complicated enough that the case doesn't close. Lowe turned to Marsh. I need to call Helena. Use the car, Marsh said. He went. The hallway was briefly, relatively quiet. A monitor beeped somewhere behind a closed door. An overhead announcement called a name Emily didn't recognize. Marsh was looking at her with the expression she had worn in the staff car, the honest accounting look. You could have led with Steck's name, Marsh said. When I told you about the operation compromise, you knew something then. I suspected something. Suspecting and knowing are different. When did you know? 30 seconds ago, Emily said, when I saw the signature. Marsh nodded slowly. She did not say I'm sorry, and Emily did not need her to, which was one of the functional things about the relationship between them. They had both been in the business of hard outcomes long enough to understand that certain words were gestures with no structural content. He's going to know the convoy survivors are here, Emily said. He's going to know they had the order with them. Ruiz documented it, but Steck may not know she photographed it. He may assume that document was lost in the crash or destroyed in the vehicle fire. That gives us a window. A short one. Emily looked down the hallway toward Ruiz's room. She's a witness to the order. So is Reyes, to the flag he submitted, and the override. Those are material witnesses in a federal case, Renata. Marsh straightened. I'll get security on both rooms. Hospital security isn't not hospital security. Marsh already had her phone out. Give me 4 minutes. The 4 minutes became 8, and in those 8 minutes, 2 things happened. The first was that Marcus, the orderly from the day shift who had chased Emily across the parking lot that morning, appeared at the end of the hallway and stopped when he saw her, visibly relieved in the overextended way of someone who has been carrying information and doesn't know what to do with it. I tried to call you, he said, slightly out of breath when he reached her. My phone's in my truck. Tasha, charge nurse, you know Tasha. She found something. About an hour after you left this morning, in the supply records. He was speaking quickly, the words slightly out of order in his urgency. She wasn't looking for anything. She was doing a routine cross-check on the overnight orders, and she found a discrepancy in the controlled medication inventory, not a small one. A pattern, going back 8 months. Emily went still. What kind of pattern? Medications being logged as administered that weren't. Billed to patient accounts for procedures that didn't happen the way they were documented. He lowered his voice. Tasha matched 6 patient records. Patients who were here for routine procedures, not trauma, not complex. Being billed for post-operative interventions that the nursing notes don't support. The billing goes to... He stopped, checked the hall. It goes through an insurance coding pathway that Solt restructured 14 months ago. Emily looked at him. 26 years old and earnest, and he had no idea how significant what he had just told her was. Where's Tasha now? She went to Solt's office to report it because she didn't know. She hadn't heard yet about the federal thing. She just found it and went up. He looked uncertain. That was 40 minutes ago. She hasn't come back. Emily turned and walked fast toward Marsh, who was finishing her call. She relayed Marcus's information in 40 seconds. Marsh processed it without interrupting. Solt left the building, Lowe said, coming back through the entrance door, phone in hand. We have visual on him. He drove to a commercial property on the east side of town. We're getting the address. Tasha Okonkwo went to his office 40 minutes ago, Emily said. She's a charge nurse. She found the billing discrepancy. The next 5 seconds were a sequence of decisions made in the compressed, overlapping way of people who have operated in time-sensitive environments, and understand that the cost of hesitation is not hypothetical. Lowe called his contact in the building. Marsh's security detail, 2 individuals in civilian clothes who had arrived in those 8 minutes and stationed themselves without announcement, split, one to the stairwell and one to the elevator. Emily went with the stairwell. Nobody told her to stay back, and she did not wait to find out if they would. Solt's office was on the administrative floor. The door was closed. She tried the handle, locked from the inside, and then she knocked. Silence. She knocked harder. "Tasha, if you're in there, call out." A sound. Muffled, behind wood, but there. Marsh's security officer was at her shoulder. "Open it," Emily said. He produced a tool from his jacket that was not a key and worked the lock in 11 seconds. The door swung in. Tasha Okonkwo was in the room, seated in Solt's chair with the posture of someone who had been sitting there for a long time and was trying to appear less frightened than she was. She was 43, broad-shouldered, with the calm of someone who managed a trauma floor and had seen most categories of human crisis. But this was a different category, and she knew it. "He told me to stay," she said. Her voice was steady. "He took my phone." On the desk was a printed spreadsheet, the billing record she had brought up, and beside it, Tasha's phone. Solt had taken it, but left the records. He had been in a hurry. "Are you hurt?" Emily asked. "No." Tasha looked at her steadily. "He said I was interfering with a confidential administrative review, and that if I left the building before he cleared me, I could face termination." A beat. "Then he left the building." Emily let out a breath. It was not quite a laugh. "He's already being investigated for fraud. The termination threat is the least of his problems." She looked at the records on the desk. "Don't touch those. We need to photograph everything as is." The second thing that happened in those 8 minutes, or rather whose consequences arrived now, was that Warren Steck had not been idle. Lowe received the information from his contact in Helena as Emily was coming back down the stairwell. Steck's consulting firm had placed 3 calls in the last hour to a number in Copper Falls. The number resolved to a prepaid mobile. They were working on physical location. "He's coordinating something here," Lowe said. Reyes had come down from wherever he had been waiting when he heard the increased activity in the corridor. He stood in the hallway outside Ruiz's room with the alert readiness of someone who had not fully left operational mode despite being technically a visitor in a hospital. "Who's Steck coordinating with?" Emily asked Lowe. "We don't know yet." "Holloway," Reyes said. Everyone looked at him. He said it with the certainty of someone who has been running a parallel calculation and has arrived at the answer. Needs something done in Copper Falls that he can't do through official channels. "Where's Holloway now?" Emily asked. Lowe was already typing. He got an answer in 90 seconds from a contact she couldn't see. Released from county custody at 1400, Holloway was brought in on the assault charge from the bar footage, but the county DA's office said he stopped, read something. His jaw tightened slightly. The DA declined to hold him pending the full warrant review. "He's out." Emily stood with that for a moment. "Who is the DA?" she asked. Lowe looked up. "His name is Carl Pruitt. Wade Pruitt. Carl Pruitt." She did not need to ask if they were related. "How many people in this county," Emily said, "are connected to Kestrel?" Nobody answered, which was its own kind of answer. Reyes moved to the window at the end of the hall, east-facing, overlooking the hospital's secondary parking lot. He stood there with the particular stillness of someone not looking at a view but watching a perimeter. Emily came and stood beside him. The secondary lot held a mix of staff vehicles and a few county emergency unit trucks that had staged here after the convoy response. Nothing looked out of place, but nothing looks out of place was its own category of information if you were the type of person who had learned to pay attention to parking lots. "What are you seeing?" she asked quietly. "Gray pickup. Been there since we arrived. Engines running. You can see the exhaust in this temperature." He did not point, did not look directly. "Backed into the far corner. Clear line of sight to the main entrance." Emily registered it without turning her head. "Could be a staff vehicle." "Could be." He paused. "I've been watching it for 12 minutes. Nobody's gotten in or out." She went back to Marsh. "We may have a vehicle watching the building. Secondary lot, gray pickup, backed in, engine running, far corner." Marsh called it to her security officer. Lowe pulled up something on his tablet. 40 seconds passed. Registered to Titan Ground Services, Lowe said. The quality of the air in the hallway changed. I need to know who's in that truck, Marsh said. Her voice had an edge now, not panic, which it never did, but the efficiency of someone who has just reclassified the situation. If we approach it directly, they know we've made them, Emily said. If we don't, they watch this building and report everyone who goes in and out to Holloway, who is currently unaccounted for. Marsh looked at her. Option 3. Emily understood option 3. It was the thing she had been doing since she was 22 years old, the approach that did not look like an approach. Give me 5 minutes, she said. She went back to the nursing staff locker room on the clinical floor, changed out of the gown she had put on over her clothes in the trauma bay, and emerged in the scrub top and jacket she had worn in. She took the back exit, the loading dock corridor which led to the side lot and connected by a service road to the secondary parking area, and she moved at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, the pace of someone who had finished a shift and was looking for a car. She came around the building from the north side, away from the hospital entrance, threading through the parked vehicles with no direct approach vector. The gray pickup was 40 yards away when she first acquired it from this angle. One person visible in the driver's seat. She adjusted her trajectory slightly, diagonal, not aimed at the truck, aiming for a vehicle 3 rows over, and kept her head in neutral position, gaze slightly downcast, posture recalibrated away from the alert readiness that her body defaulted to and toward the particular physical looseness of someone who was tired and cold and going home. At 20 yards, she had enough. Driver, male, heavy build, watching his mirrors with the frequency of someone expecting something. She had also seen the phone in his hand, not pressed to his ear but held at dashboard height, screen bright, which meant either texting or a live connection with the screen facing up. She turned and walked back the way she came. Inside, she found Lowe. One occupant, male, heavyset. He has an active phone connection running, screen up, live call, or text thread. She paused. He's not here to watch. He's a relay. Someone is getting real-time information from him. About what's moving in and out of the building, Lowe said. About who's moving. She looked at Marsh. Steck knows this hospital is where his convoy survivors are. He knows the survivors had the order. If Holloway is loose and Steck is coordinating, they're not going to try to enter a hospital with federal and military personnel present, Marsh said. It was not quite a statement of certainty. It was a statement of what she needed to be true while she calculated whether it was. They're not going to do it the way we're thinking about it, Emily agreed. But there are 6 other patients in this building, non-military. Ruiz and the convoy soldiers are the witnesses, but the documentation is physical, the phone photograph, the printed order form from Solt's office. The phone photograph can be transmitted, Lowe said. I already did, Ruiz's voice said from the doorway of her room. She was sitting up, the monitor leads reaching, phone in hand. Sent it to a personal cloud account before I showed it to anyone. My sergeant taught me that too. She looked at Reyes with an expression that was exhausted and a little defiant. You said document everything before it disappears. Reyes looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, not pride exactly, but adjacent to it. That's exactly what I said. Okay, Lowe said. He was already typing again. I'm going to need that cloud access. I'm going to need your badge number first, Ruiz said. Despite everything, Emily almost smiled. Ruiz was 24 years old with a chest tube and a cracked phone, and she was negotiating credentials with a DOJ agent. She was going to be fine. The next 20 minutes moved in controlled layers. Lowe established transmission of the photograph to his office in Helena. Marsh's security officer went to the secondary lot with a county deputy she had pulled in from the crash site detail and brought the Titan Ground Services driver in for questioning, a man named Garrett Sims, who had worked for Holloway for 3 years and who, when presented with the choice between silence and a conversation about his level of involvement in a federal fraud and conspiracy case, chose conversation within about 90 seconds. What Sims said was specific and damaging. Holloway had spoken to Steck twice since the convoy crash. The second call, 40 minutes ago, had included instructions. Sims had been tasked with identifying which rooms in the hospital held the convoy soldiers. He had a contact on the hospital's administrative staff who could flag a room transfer order. The plan was not to enter the building. The plan was to create a documented administrative reason to move 2 of the critical patients, Ruiz and a soldier named Aronson, who had been in the cervical case, to a different facility. A smaller one, 20 miles east. One without federal presence. One where a civilian records request could, theoretically, access patient belongings. The phone. The photograph. Emily was in the hallway when Marsh relayed this. She stood still for a moment, feeling the architecture of it, the network of connections, the way each piece had been positioned, the patience required to build something this layered. Steck had spent years inside systems, understood how they could be used. "Who's the administrative contact?" Emily asked. "Sims gave us a name," Marsh said. "It's being verified." "In the meantime, nobody is being transferred anywhere." Marsh's voice closed on that firmly. "I've put that in writing to hospital administration, such as it exists at the moment. Such as it exists." Solt was gone, cornered somewhere east of town with a federal warrant accelerating toward him. The administrative floor was running on two deputy administrators who had spent the afternoon looking increasingly like people who understood they were on the deck of a ship that had changed captains mid-crossing. Dr. Greer came out of the trauma bay and found Emily in the hallway. He looked worn, the particular depletion of a physician who has run a complex multi-patient situation and come out the other side of it, but he also looked, underneath that, relieved in a way that had been building since she walked back through the door. "3 of my 8 are moving to recovery," he said. "2 more are stable and won't need surgical intervention. The cervical case is imaging. Preliminary read looks like no spinal involvement, which is better than I expected." He paused. "You should know that you saved that corporal's life. The hemothorax was moving faster than the transport monitors were showing. If she'd gone another hour without the chest tube..." "She's the one who held it together," Emily said. "Ruiz. She held herself together enough to give us what we needed." Greer looked at her for a moment. He had known her for 3 years and had always seemed, when she thought about it, slightly puzzled by her, by the gap between what she was and how she was presenting. He was not puzzled now. "What's going to happen to this hospital?" he asked. The question carried more weight than its surface. "That depends on what happens to Solt," she said. "But the people who did the actual work here are still doing it. That's something." He nodded. He went back in. She turned back to Marsh and found a different expression waiting for her, the one that came before news that had not yet been processed. "We have a location on Solt," Marsh said. "The property on the east side." She turned the tablet to show Emily a satellite image. A commercial building, 2-story, the kind of light industrial space that housed contractors and small logistics companies. "Kestrel has a regional office there. Lowe has units moving." "And Holloway?" "That's the part..." Marsh stopped, started again. "Sims says Holloway had a second location, not the Kestrel office. A private address north of town, in the hills. When we put Sims in the car and his phone fell out..." She turned the tablet to show a text thread. "There are messages from the last 40 minutes on that phone, from a contact labeled H." Emily read the most recent message on the screen. "Change of plan. Not the records. Package is already gone. Need confirmation of which one talked." She read it twice. Which one talked? The record photograph was already transmitted. Steck and Holloway knew, or suspected, that the documentation had survived the crash. The tactical objective had shifted from recovering physical evidence to identifying the source, the soldier who had photographed the order form and given it to Emily. Ruiz. Emily was already moving back down the hallway when the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a partial failure. The entire corridor went dark in the same instant, and the backup generator, which should have activated in under 3 seconds, did not come on. In the darkness, the monitors inside the patient room switched to battery power, their emergency tones suddenly the only sound, high and separate in the black. Emily stopped moving. She pressed her back to the wall. 5 seconds of darkness. Then, from the direction of the stairwell at the far end of the corridor, she heard the door. The stairwell door opened slowly, not fast, which was worse than fast. Fast was adrenaline and noise. Slow was someone who had done this before and understood that patience was the most dangerous thing you could bring through a door in the dark. Emily did not move. She pressed flat against the wall and let her eyes adjust, cataloging what she could from sound and the thin emergency lighting that bled in from the window at the far end of the corridor. Enough to separate shapes from background, not enough to give her the edges she needed. 2 shapes came through the stairwell door, moving low, moving apart from each other immediately on entry, tactical spacing, not civilian behavior. She clocked the separation and understood the intent. 2 people at distance meant that disabling one did not disable the other's line of response. She heard Marcia's voice from the far end of the hall, coming from the direction of the administrative floor junction, controlled, sharp, the particular register of someone who is issuing a command and expects it to be heard. Federal agents, identify yourselves. The two shapes stopped moving, a beat of stillness that told Emily they were reassessing, which meant they had not expected federal presence on this floor in this configuration. Then the closer shape turned toward Marcia's voice. Emily moved. She came off the wall low and fast, covering the distance to the nearer figure in 4 strides, and she went for control rather than impact. Right arm around the neck from behind, weight committed, the specific geometry of a hold that removes agency without requiring leverage she didn't have in a dark corridor. The figure was bigger than her and reacted immediately, hands coming up, body dropping into a counter stance that told her this was someone trained. She adjusted her grip, drove her hip into his lower back, and used his own resistance to torque him off balance. He went sideways into the wall, and she followed, keeping the hold, pressing him face first into the surface, and getting her knee into the back of his thigh to break his ability to push back. "Don't," she said quietly, directly into his ear. The second figure had turned at the noise. Marcia's security officer was already on him from the side, and Reyes, she hadn't known Reyes was in the hall, but he was, came in from the opposite angle, and the second figure went down with considerably less grace than the first. Lights came back on. Not the full corridor, just the emergency strip lighting, activated from somewhere on the administrative floor. It cast everything in low amber and made the hall look like the inside of something that was not quite right. But it was enough. The man Emily had pinned to the wall was Derek Holloway. She held the position for 2 seconds, making sure he understood the geometry of what was happening. Then she stepped back and gave Marcia's officer the space to move in. Holloway's hands were secured behind him in the time it took Emily to take 3 breaths, and the second figure, one of Holloway's people, a man she didn't recognize, was already face down on the floor with Reyes's knee in his back and an expression of someone who had not anticipated this particular outcome. Holloway turned his head as far as the hold would allow and found Emily's face. His nose was still swollen from the bar floor. The expression he wore was not the assembled threat display she had seen at the Ironclad. It was something rawer and less composed, the face of a man encountering a specific kind of unpleasant recalibration. "You cut the power," Emily said. He said nothing. "Where's your phone?" Still nothing. Marcia's officer found it during the pat-down, jacket pocket, screen dark, and handed it to Lowe, who had appeared from the administrative corridor with 2 county deputies who were operating with the focused energy of men who had spent the day being given information in increments and were now watching the increments resolve into something coherent. The corridor filled with the procedural noise of 2 people being restrained and processed, and in that noise Emily stepped back against the wall and let herself feel, for approximately 4 seconds, the full weight of what had almost happened. Ruiz's room was 30 feet behind her. If Holloway had gotten that far, if the lights had been out 60 seconds longer, if Reyes hadn't been in the hall, she ended that line of thinking. It hadn't happened. The distance between almost and actually was the only one that mattered. "Steck called it," she said to Marsh, keeping her voice low. "The power cut was coordinated. Holloway doesn't have the access to pull hospital infrastructure." Marsh was already on her phone, walking. She came back in 90 seconds with the particular expression of someone who has received information that is simultaneously good and infuriating. The power cut came from a service access panel in the basement. Manual override. "We have hospital security footage of someone entering the mechanical room 11 minutes ago." She turned the phone to show Emily a grainy corridor image, a figure in maintenance coveralls, face partially obscured by the hood, moving with purpose toward the mechanical room door. "We're running the footage." "Steck's third arm," Emily said. "He prepared this," Marsh agreed. "This wasn't reactive. He had Holloway positioned, had the power access arranged, had a plan for the patient records." She looked at Holloway, who was seated against the wall now with his hands secured and a county deputy on either side. "He set this in motion before we had Sims, before he knew we were here." "Which means he knew something was moving before today," Emily said. "Before the convoy crash." "He's been watching Kestrel's exposure for months," Lowe said, coming to stand with them. "The convoy crash wasn't improvised. It was a contingency. Something in the investigation got close enough that Steck activated a fallback." He looked at his phone. "Helena confirms. Units are at the Kestrel office. Solt is in the building." "Does he know?" He's about to. Richard Solt, it emerged, had driven to the Kestrel regional office at the specific direction of Warren Steck. He had believed, or had allowed himself to believe, which was a different thing, that Steck was managing the situation. That the network they had built over 4 years was durable enough to absorb the pressure of a federal investigation if the right people said the right things and the documentation got complicated enough to slow the case to ineffectiveness. He was in Kestrel's second-floor conference room when the Helena units arrived. 3 DOJ agents and 2 state investigators moving through the building in the deliberate way of people who had done this enough times to know that speed was less important than coverage. Solt was apparently seated at the conference table with a laptop open and his phone in his hand. And when the agents entered, he stood up with the specific posture of a man who has decided his best option is to perform confusion and hope the performance holds. It did not hold. The laptop, which he had been attempting to close when the door opened, contained a document that would eventually take forensic accountants 16 days to fully map, but whose surface was immediately legible. A structured ledger of the billing scheme running through Harmon Ridge Medical, organized by quarter, annotated with amounts and routing accounts, with commentary in the margins that read less like financial records and more like a personal log from someone who had been keeping score. Lowe received the summary from Helena and relayed it to Marsh in the hospital hallway, and then Marsh relayed it to Emily because Emily was present, and because Marsh had learned over the years that Emily processed information better when she had the complete picture. He kept records, Emily said. Detailed ones, Lowe said, including communication logs with Steck going back 3 years. References to the compromise of a classified operation. No specifics, but the timing and the phrasing are going to be enough for the investigators who know what they're looking at. Emily was quiet for a moment. 3 years. She had spent 3 years in Copper Falls, in the small house on the gravel road, running the mountain trail before dawn, working overnight shifts in a hospital she hadn't known was connected to the thing that had destroyed her unit. And Solt had been keeping a ledger and a laptop in an office 3 miles away, annotated with what read, apparently, like a man building an insurance policy against his own partners. He was going to give them up eventually, she said. That's our read, Lowe agreed. The detail of the records is too organized for someone who was just covering himself. He was building leverage. A pause. Which means he was afraid of Steck. Which meant Steck's position in the network was not equal partnership. It meant Steck was the structure and Solt was the instrument, and Solt had known, had maybe always known, that instruments get discarded when the operation changes shape. The ledger was his exit plan. The problem was that he had stayed too long and the exit had closed around him before he used it. Emily thought about the morning, the pressed suit, the right-angled desk, the practiced silence. She thought about being told she had violent tendencies, about walking out of that office with a box under her arm, about the gravel road in the dark. She felt, on the subject of Richard Solt's ledger and its implications, exactly nothing she was required to perform. Holloway was transported at 1740 hours. He did not speak beyond his name when asked for it, which was his right. And also, given the phone in his jacket pocket and the text thread with Steck's number, and the fact that he had been physically apprehended in a hospital corridor during a deliberate power disruption, a choice with limited strategic value. The county deputies who took him out of the building did so with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that this arrest was being watched by federal agents and adjusted their conduct accordingly. Wade Pruitt was picked up at his residence at 1812 hours by state investigators. He did not attempt to resist, which was the first reasonable decision he had made in the sequence of events. His brother Carl, the DA who had declined to hold Holloway after the bar assault, was placed on administrative review pending an investigation into whether the decision had been made under external pressure. It probably had been. These things usually resolved to probably before they resolved to, certainly, and the distance between the two was where lawyers lived. Marcus found Emily in the break room at 1830 hours. She had been sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and a sequence of thoughts she was working through without urgency, because the urgency of the previous several hours had drained in a way that left her very tired and very clear simultaneously. He sat down across from her. He did not say anything immediately, which was the most useful thing he could have done. Tasha's okay, he said eventually. I know, I checked. She's filing a statement about the billing records and about Solt locking her in the office. He looked at his hands on the table. She's furious, like actually furious. She keeps saying she can't believe she worked for someone who was billing ghost procedures to sick people for 8 months and she didn't see it. He paused. I told her she saw it the moment she looked. Emily looked at him. That's exactly right, she said. He nodded. He seemed like he needed to say something else and wasn't sure if the moment supported it. You came back, he said finally. This morning you drove away and you didn't have to come back. The highway was in the other direction. You know what I mean? She looked at the cold coffee. People were going to get hurt if I didn't. That's a simpler calculation than it sounds. Most people make it more complicated. Most people haven't had as much practice simplifying it, she said, and there was enough weight behind that, enough of the actual truth of her history, that Marcus heard it and did not push further. He left her with the cold coffee. She sat another 10 minutes, then got up and went to find Reyes. I was outside, on the loading dock at the back of the hospital, leaning against the railing in the cold, with his jacket open, in the way that people who run hot or who have been in too many heated rooms do when they get access to fresh air. The sky had gone fully dark, and the mountains were shapes without detail, present only as absence, the part of the sky where no stars were. She came and stood beside him. The cold was the specific dry cold of a Montana night in November. Not wind, just temperature, clean and unambiguous. You knew I was in the hall, she said. I heard you come out of the locker room. You walk differently depending on whether you're in clinical mode. He glanced at her. In the hall, you were not in clinical mode. You didn't announce yourself. You didn't need me to, and I wanted to see what you'd do. He said it without apology. I've worked alongside a lot of people. I like to know what the person next to me actually does when something happens, not what they say they'll do. She understood that completely. She had spent her career making the same assessment. You knew something about who I was before Marsh confirmed it, she said. The tourniquet, he said, and the way you ran the triage sequence on the highway. You weren't adapting a civilian protocol. You were running something you'd done under worse conditions. He was quiet for a moment. The sealed file didn't surprise me. It confirmed a read I already had. Does it change anything, how you work with people when you know their background? He considered the question seriously. It changes the shorthand, he said. I trust the baseline faster, but I don't lower the bar. If anything, the expectation goes up. He looked at her steadily. You met it. She didn't respond to that. She wasn't sure how to receive it except honestly, and she wasn't ready for honest receipt of anything that direct. Ruiz is going to be fine, she said instead. Yeah. His voice had the particular quality of someone carrying relief they haven't fully processed. She's annoying about being fussed over. Told the overnight nurse she didn't need her pillow adjusted 3 times. Good. Is it? He almost smiled. The nurse looked ready to adjust something other than the pillow. Emily almost smiled back. Good patient behavior is overrated. People who fight for themselves recover faster. He looked out at the mountains. The exhaust from the hospital's ventilation system drifted across the loading dock in slow white clouds. What happens to you now? He asked. She had been thinking about this in the break room, in the sequence she had been working through without urgency. Loa needs testimony, she said. Marsh needs the same. There's a deposition process, a timeline I don't control. She paused. Solt is in federal custody. The hospital needs administration. Greer needs senior nursing staff. Another pause. The house on the gravel road has a month-to-month lease. Reyes looked at her. That's not actually an answer. It's the answer I have right now. He nodded. He accepted it, which she appreciated, and they stood in the cold for another minute before she went back inside. Lowe called her into the conference room they had commandeered on the administrative floor at 2100 hours. Marsh was there. The lieutenant colonel, whose name was Ferris and who had spent most of the day performing the specific function of institutional authority made physically present, was there. And there was a fourth person Emily had not seen before, a woman in her late 40s in a dark blazer, introduced as Special Agent Diana Vance from the DOJ's Organized Crime and Fraud Unit out of Denver. Vance had arrived 2 hours ago and had been reading documents since. She had the energy of someone who had been handed a case that was considerably more significant than the one they had been briefed on and was calibrating upward. I want to walk through the STEC connection, Vance said, without preamble. Specifically, the operational compromise. What you know, what you can document, and what you're prepared to testify to. Emily sat down. She was tired in a way that went beyond the physical, but the clarity was still there. The cold, structural clarity that had arrived when she read Steck's name on Ruiz's phone screen and everything reconfigured. She talked for 40 minutes. She told it the way she always told difficult things. Factual, sequenced, specific. She named the operation, the unit, the sequence of events she had direct knowledge of. She described what she had known at the time, what she had suspected, and what she had been unable to prove. She was careful to mark each category clearly because Vance was the kind of person who would hold you to the distinction later. When she finished, Vance looked at her for a moment. "You've been carrying this for how long?" she asked. 3 years in Copper Falls, Emily said. 7 years total. Vance nodded. The record Solt was keeping, the communication logs referencing the operation, combined with the financial thread Garrett's team has already built, and with your testimony establishing the operational context. She paused, sorting through implications. Steck is looking at federal conspiracy charges on top of the Kestrel fraud. The classified operation compromise is going to go to a separate review process, but that process will have what it needs. "Where's Steck now?" Emily said. Lowe answered. "Still unlocated. We have his known addresses covered. He hasn't used his primary phone since the call to Sims this afternoon." A beat. "He's experienced. He'll know when to go quiet." "He'll also know," Emily said, "that going quiet is not the same as being safe. He built this network on the assumption that the pieces didn't know how they connected. They know now." "We'll find him," Vance said. She said it with the certainty of someone who has found people who did not want to be found before, and understood that eventually was a guarantee rather than a hope. Marsh walked Emily out of the conference room at 2200 hours. The administrative floor was quieter now, the day's emergency having settled into paperwork and procedure, which was where most emergencies eventually went. They walked the corridor slowly. "The formal reinstatement process," Marsh said. "Your service record. It can be reopened. Given what Solt's records show, given the financial thread. There's a basis now for a review of the circumstances of your separation." Emily was quiet for a moment. "What would that mean?" "It means the record would reflect what actually happened, not the version that existed when you left." Marsh glanced at her. "It means Captain Voss is not a person who disappeared." Emily thought about the mountain trail before dawn, the gravel road, the overnight floor and the 12-hour shifts and the particular discipline of being nothing for 3 years because nothing was safe. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's not a no." "It's not a no," she agreed. They stopped at the elevator. Marsh turned to face her with the honest accounting expression. "You should know that 2 of the Harmon Ridge board members spent the evening in a conversation with federal investigators and came out of it with a strong interest in operational reform," Marsh said. "The interim administrator they've appointed is a woman named Sandra Vell. She has a clean record, and she called Dr. Greer at 9 o'clock tonight to ask what the clinical floor needed." Emily registered this. "Greer will give her a list." "He already started." Marsh paused. She also asked who had been running trauma today. Greer told her. Emily looked at the elevator doors. "You don't have to stay," Marsh said. "But you don't have to run either. Those have been your only 2 options for 7 years. There's a third one." The elevator arrived. Emily didn't get in. She stood there until the doors closed again and the floor indicator moved. She was still standing there when Reyes appeared from the stairwell door, taking the stairs, she noticed, which was either habit or the preference of someone who didn't like enclosed spaces, both of which she understood. He stopped when he saw her expression. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "I'm thinking." "About?" She looked at the elevator doors, then at the stairwell door, then at Reyes. "The third option," she said. He waited. "I've been making myself small," she said. "For 7 years. I thought small was safe. I thought if I was nothing, I was protected." She stopped. It was difficult to say things directly that you had only ever said to yourself as structural observations, stripped of the weight they actually carried. "It didn't work. Solt ran my name anyway. Holloway walked into the bar anyway. Being nothing doesn't protect you from people who are threatened by what you were." Reyes said nothing. He was letting her finish. "I'm tired of running a 3-year contract with a closed-off life as the best-case outcome," she said. It came out more plainly than she intended, which was probably the only way it needed to come out. Reyes looked at her steadily. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds like something worth being tired of." At 0340 hours, With the overnight floor at the low hum of a hospital between crises, Emily was sitting at the nursing station finishing a supplemental incident report that Lowe had requested, a written account of the physical sequence in the corridor when Holloway entered. She was writing it in the clipped, factual style she used for clinical documentation, and she was alone at the station because the overnight staff had redistributed to patient rooms and the administrative floor was dark. Her phone, retrieved from the truck, buzzed with a call from an unrecognized number. She looked at it for a moment. Unrecognized numbers had called her exactly twice in 3 years in Copper Falls, both times from the staffing agency. She answered. The voice on the other end was male, older, with the controlled cadence of someone who had spent decades giving orders and had never stopped expecting them to be received without question. "Ms. Voss," the voice said, "I think we should have a conversation before this goes further." She knew the voice. She had heard it in operation briefings 7 years ago, in the flat fluorescent light of a forward operating base in a location she was not permitted to name. She had heard it in her memory many times since, attached to the phrase, "The intelligence assessment is solid, Captain," delivered 2 hours before the compromise that killed 3 of her people. Warren Steck. She kept her voice completely even. "How did you get this number?" "I get what I need," he said. "That's the relevant information." A pause. "I think there are aspects of this situation that the people you've been speaking with have characterized in a way that serves their interests rather than the full picture. I'd like the opportunity to offer you a different perspective." Emily looked at the incident report on the screen in front of her, the clipped factual language, the sequence in the corridor. "Where are you?" she said. "Somewhere comfortable." Another pause, the pause of a man choosing words for someone he has assessed and is not certain he has assessed correctly. "I understand you've had a difficult day. What I'd like you to understand is that the people who have been helping you today have interests of their own. The investigation, the charges. There's a version of this that doesn't require you to be the central figure. There's a version where you walk away from this cleanly, without the years of depositions and subpoenas and having your history examined. Are you trying to negotiate with me?" Emily said. "I'm offering you a conversation. You routed a military convoy through a mountain grade your own contractor flagged as unsafe. 8 soldiers were injured. One of them had a 7-year-old she was going home to." Emily's voice stayed level. "Conversations between us stopped being a viable option approximately 7 years ago. You just didn't know it yet." A long silence. "I see," Steck said. "I'm going to ask you once to tell me where you are," Emily said. "Not because I think you'll answer, because I want it on record that I asked." "Record," Steck said, and something shifted in his voice, a tightening, a recalculation. "You're recording this call." "The number you called is flagged in a federal investigation," Emily said. "Everything on this line has been live to the DOJ office in Helena since the second ring." She paused. "But I'll be honest with you, Colonel. I also have you on speaker. Lowe's been listening from the doorway since you said Ms. Voss." She looked up. Lowe was, in fact, standing in the corridor doorway with his phone in his hand and an expression of someone who had just watched something they would be describing to colleagues for the next several years. Another silence on Steck's end, longer than the first. "You set up a trap," he said. "You called a number you shouldn't have been able to get," she said, "which means you had it from somewhere inside the investigation, which means there's a leak we needed to identify, and you just used it, which means we just identified it." She kept her voice level. "You've been operating on the assumption that this network is intact. It isn't. Solt is in custody, and he's been keeping a ledger for 3 years. Holloway is in county lockup. Sims gave us the secondary location. The Kestrel office is sealed." The silence on the other end was different now. Not the silence of a man choosing words. The silence of a man recalculating whether any of his remaining options were actually options. "The only thing left that matters," Emily said, "is where you are right now." She heard faintly something in the background of the call, a sound she placed after half a second. Wind. The specific quality of wind against an exterior wall, moving through something structural, eaves maybe, or an antenna, an outdoor location or a building with insufficient insulation against the mountain cold. "There are 6 places within 30 miles of Copper Falls," Reyes said from the other doorway, the one she had not been watching, "that Kestrel has property access to. We've covered 4. The other 2 are in the hills north of town." He had a topographic map in his hand. He had been in the other corridor. She hadn't heard him come back from outside. She looked at him, then she looked at Lo. "Tell Helena," she said. Lo was already talking into his phone. On the line, Steck said nothing, but he hadn't disconnected, and that told Emily something she filed alongside everything else she had learned today about the specific variety of human weakness that presents itself as power for years before the structure holding it finally, visibly gives. He was still on the line when the county units reached the second property in the hills north of town and found the lights on. The lights were on in the second property, a single-story structure set back from a dirt access road behind a stand of lodgepole pine, the kind of building that looked like a hunting cabin from the outside and held the particular emptiness of a place that had been vacated in a hurry. County units found the back door unlocked, a coffee mug on the table still warm at the base, a laptop open, screen dark, lid not fully closed. The chair pushed back at the angle of someone who stood suddenly rather than deliberately. Steck had disconnected the call 40 seconds before they arrived. Lo relayed this to Emily at the nursing station at 4:19 hours. She received it without visible reaction and looked at the incident report still open on the screen and thought about the specific quality of the silence at the end of the call. The silence of a man who had finally understood the shape of the room he was standing in, the walls having moved while he wasn't watching. "He's on foot, or he had a second vehicle staged," Reyes said from the doorway. "Second vehicle," Emily said. "He's been planning contingencies longer than we've been building this case. He had an exit." "Exits run out," Lo said. "They do," she agreed. "Just not always on our schedule." She saved the incident report, closed the laptop, and sat back in the nursing station chair. Around her, the overnight floor maintained its low-frequency rhythm. Monitors, the occasional soft sound of a door, the distant murmur of a staff conversation somewhere down the corridor. It was the sound of a hospital doing what hospitals do when the crisis has passed, which was continue. Continue caring for the people in the rooms, continue the work. It did not pause for the drama that had occupied the administrative floors. She had always found something grounding in that. She stayed at the station until 0600, finishing the documentation Lo had requested and adding 2 supplemental observations she had not included in the verbal account. Details about the timing of the power cut that clarified the coordination. Details about Holloway's tactical positioning in the corridor that spoke to prior planning rather than improvisation. She wrote them in the same clipped prose and then emailed the completed document to the address Lo had given her. Then she went and checked on Ruiz. The corporal was asleep, finally, after a night that had been too eventful for someone with a chest tube and a cracked phone and the kind of stubbornness that insisted on staying informed despite the nursing staff's repeated suggestions that she rest. Her breathing was even. The drain was performing correctly. Emily stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the monitor readouts, running the clinical check she would have run for any patient on this ward, and felt something settle in her chest that had not been settled in a very long time. She went home at 0630. Drove the gravel road in the pale early light, parked the truck, went inside. The box was still on the kitchen table where she had left it the morning before. She picked it up and put it in the hall closet. She did not unpack it. She was not ready to decide what unpacking it meant, but she was also not ready to look at it on the kitchen table anymore, which was its own kind of decision. She slept for 5 hours. When she woke up, Steck had not been found, and the world had continued turning without pausing to accommodate that fact. And Emily lay on her back in the morning light and looked at the ceiling and thought about the difference between a resolved situation and a finished one. Warren Steck was located 11 days later. He had driven east the night of the arrest, using back roads in a vehicle registered to a shell company that took the investigators 4 days to trace. He had crossed into Wyoming, then north into a rural county where Kestrel's network had one more thread, a property manager who handled a remote ranch used, nominally, for corporate retreats. The property manager had provided access and asked nothing, which made him complicit in a way that the subsequent conversation with federal investigators would clarify in detail. Steck was arrested on a Tuesday morning in the kitchen of that ranch, seated at a table with a cup of coffee and the particular look of a man who has spent 11 days running a calculation and arrived at the conclusion that the calculation is finished. He did not resist. He said nothing beyond confirming his name, which was the only cooperation he would offer until he had spoken to an attorney, and the attorney, once retained, would advise him to say considerably less than he probably wanted to. Lowe called Emily with the news. She was on the mountain trail when the call came in, 6 miles out, the cold, clean, and still, the light coming over the eastern ridge in the low-angled way of November that turned everything amber before it warmed toward white. She stopped on the trail and listened to Lowe's summary and said thank you and ended the call and stood there for a moment with the mountains in all four directions and the specific kind of silence that Montana manufactures in the hour after dawn. Then she ran the remaining 2 miles back. The formal process took the shape that formal processes always take. Slow, procedural, occasionally maddening, ultimately thorough. The federal case against Kestrel's strategic partners was built across 16 weeks of forensic accounting, testimony collection, and document review. Solt's ledger proved to be the linchpin, not because it was the most legally decisive piece of evidence, but because it was the most human. He had written it like a man conducting a private argument with himself about what he was doing and why, and the argument revealed, in its margins and its qualifications, and its occasional late-night additions, exactly what he had known and exactly when he had known it. Richard Solt pled guilty to federal fraud, conspiracy, and healthcare billing fraud charges in a proceeding that lasted less than 2 hours. He received 12 years, with the possibility of reduction contingent on the extent of his cooperation, which turned out to be substantial. He gave the investigators names, dates, routing accounts, and 3 conversations with Steck that he had recorded on his own initiative. The insurance policy he had been building all along, finally spent not to protect himself, but to reduce the damage to a timeline that had already passed the point of protection. Dr. Paul Greer, in a conversation with the state medical board that was more direct than these conversations typically are, described the clinical conditions at Harmon Ridge Medical under Solt's administration in terms that left the board's investigative committee with no ambiguity about the connection between administrative choices and patient risk. The board opened a separate review of the hospital's governance structure. 6 of the billing scheme patients were identified and notified. 3 of them were owed refunds. All 6 received them. Wade Pruitt lost his badge. The formal proceeding ran 4 months and ended in a misdemeanor conviction for official misconduct, less than he deserved, more than he would have received. If the federal investigation had not put his conduct under a light, he couldn't manage. He was 51 years old and had been a police officer for 9 years, and the question of what he did next was not one that anyone in Copper Falls spent much time on. His brother Carl resigned as district attorney before the review of his decision on Holloway was completed, which was either a show of conscience or a recognition that the review's conclusion was not going to be ambiguous. He cited personal reasons. Personal reasons covered a lot of terrain. Derek Holloway was charged with aggravated assault, criminal trespass in a healthcare facility, conspiracy, and 3 counts related to his work as Kestrel's operational arm in the region. His attorney tried, twice, to have the bar assault charge reduced on the grounds that the initial incident had been mutual. The bar security footage, full interior coverage, timestamp intact, showing the complete sequence from Holloway's approach to Emily's response, made that argument untenable in a way that the attorney eventually acknowledged, in a tone that suggested he had known it was untenable before he tried. Holloway took a plea on the primary charges. 9 years. The judge noted in the sentencing statement that the attack in the ironclad was not an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was the first move in a deliberate sequence designed to remove a witness from a protected position, and the sentence would reflect that. Warren Steck went to trial. He had the resources for a prolonged defense, and he used them, which meant the trial was 11 weeks and generated more documentation than the preceding investigation. Emily testified on 2 separate days. She sat in the witness box and answered questions with the same factual, sequenced precision she brought to incident reports and clinical handoffs. And when the defense attorney attempted to characterize the operation that had destroyed her unit as a standard operational failure for which no individual was accountable, she answered with the specific facts she had, marked clearly as facts, and let the facts perform their own argument. The second time she testified, she described the route order, the highway crash, the injuries to the 8 soldiers, and the trajectory from Steck's signature on that order to the hospital corridor where Holloway had come through the stairwell door in the dark, with the specific intention of silencing a 24-year-old corporal with a cracked phone and a chest tube. She described it without editorializing. She did not need to editorialize. The sequence was its own argument, and she had learned over a long time and at significant cost when to let facts carry the weight. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Steck was convicted on 7 counts, including conspiracy, fraud, and 1 count under federal law covering the deliberate endangerment of military personnel through fraudulent logistical manipulation. The endangerment count was the one that mattered most to Emily and to Reyes and to Ruiz, who attended the verdict reading in civilian clothes, her chest tube long removed, sitting in the gallery with a stillness that had nothing to do with patience and everything to do with the particular kind of attention a person pays when something that has been wrong for a long time is finally being named correctly. Steck received 23 years. He would be 81 if he served the full term, and the judge's remarks on sentencing made clear that the court had no structural interest in abbreviating it. Emily was outside the courthouse when the verdict was announced, on the steps in the cold, watching the mountains. Lowe had told her the jury was back, and she had chosen to wait outside rather than in the gallery. She was not sure why exactly, except that she had spent 7 years carrying something, and she did not want to receive its conclusion in a crowded room. Marsh came out and stood beside her. 7 counts, Marsh said. Emily nodded. Marsh was quiet for a moment. The courthouse was behind them, and the mountain range was ahead, and between the two was the particular wide flatness of a small city street in November. A few cars, a few trees that had given up their leaves, the low sky. "The review of your service record," Marsh said, "is complete." Emily looked at her. "The formal finding is that the operational compromise was not a failure of your unit's judgment, conduct, or execution. The record has been corrected." Marsh reached into her coat and produced an envelope. "This is official. Your copy." Emily took the envelope. She did not open it. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a moment and understood that it contained a version of her history that replaced the version she had been living with for 7 years, and that the replacement was accurate, and that accuracy was not the same as not having happened, and that all of those things were true simultaneously, and none of them canceled the others out. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Marsh said. "It was always true. We just finally have the paperwork." Emily almost laughed. She didn't quite, but it was the closest she had come in a long time without forcing it. She drove back to Copper Falls on a Thursday, the week after Steck's sentencing, on a road she had driven so many times she could navigate it on reflex. The mountains were the mountains. The valley was narrow, and the afternoon light cut out early, and the town sat in the bottom of it, doing what small towns in the bottom of mountain valleys do. Enduring mostly, occasionally thriving in small ways that outsiders don't notice, and residents take for granted. She parked in front of Harmon Ridge Medical and sat in the truck for a minute. The building was the same building. It had not been transformed by the events of the last 4 months. It was still a mid-century structure with inadequate parking and a cafeteria that served food nobody was enthusiastic about. The emergency entrance still had the same slight overhang that funneled rain directly onto the automatic doors when the wind came from the east. The hospital was going to need its roof addressed before another spring, and somebody in the new administration was going to have to fight the county about the infrastructure budget to do it. These were the kinds of problems she understood. They were the right scale for daily engagement. She got out of the truck. Sandra Vell, the interim administrator, had an office that was nothing like Solt's, smaller, facing the parking lot rather than the mountain, with a desk that held the organized chaos of someone who had inherited an institution mid-crisis and was running it forward without having had the opportunity to set it up from scratch. Vell was 52, direct, and had a quality that Emily had identified in their first phone conversation and confirmed now in person. She was not interested in the appearance of good management. She was interested in the actual thing, which was rarer than people assumed. "I spoke to the state nursing board this morning," Vell said, without preamble. "Your license is in full standing. The termination has been formally expunged from your record. Solt's conduct in the termination was part of the misconduct review, and the board agreed there was no legitimate basis." She paused. "You can start Monday if that works for you, or you can take until after the new year. Either is fine." "Monday," Emily said. Vell nodded. She wrote something on a notepad with the efficiency of someone who makes decisions and then immediately moves to implement them. "Dr. Greer wants you on days. He thinks the overnight floor needs a different kind of senior presence. Someone who knows what it needs rebuilt." She looked up. "That person does not need to be you, but he asked if you'd consider it." "I'll talk to him." "Also." Vell hesitated slightly, which was the first hesitation Emily had seen from her. "There have been inquiries. About you." From the regional press, one television outlet, and approximately 47 individual people who apparently followed the trial closely enough to understand that you were involved. She set down the pen. I'm not going to tell you how to handle that, but I want you to know that this hospital's position is that what happened on November 13th is something we are not going to pretend didn't happen. Emily looked at her. The staff here knows what you did, Vel said, not just the trauma bay, the corridor, the route identification, all of it. She paused. You were let go the same morning you went back to that highway. People around here don't forget that kind of math. Emily was quiet for a moment. She was not good at receiving this, never had been. There was a part of her that wanted to redirect it, to locate the technical discussion of clinical staffing needs and stay there. She recognized this impulse and made the deliberate choice to sit with the discomfort instead. I'll be here Monday, she said. She stopped at the Ironclad on the way home. Gil was behind the bar. He looked up when she came in, and his expression moved through a brief, complicated sequence before landing on something that was relieved and slightly sheepish in equal measure. The expression of a man who had held his tongue when he should have spoken and knew it. She sat at the end of the counter, the same seat. Club soda, she said. He made it, set it in front of her, stood there. I should have said something that night, he said. Yes, she said. There were reasons. I know what the reasons were, she said. Holloway was in here twice a week for 4 years. He knew your liquor license renewal timeline. He knew your name and your kids' names, and he had enough of a relationship with the right people in this county that making him your enemy felt like a cost you couldn't sustain. She looked at him directly. I understand the calculation. I also think you've been living with it since November. He had the decency not to argue with that. What changed? She asked. The footage, he said. When the federal investigators pulled the full interior footage, and I watched it back, he stopped. I watched what actually happened that night, what I should have been willing to say I watched. He was quiet for a moment. I gave a statement, a full one, everything I actually saw. I know, she said. It was part of the trial record. He nodded. He refilled her club soda, though it didn't need refilling, which was the kind of thing people do when they need something to do with their hands. You're staying in Copper Falls? Yes. Good, he said. He said it simply, without elaboration, and went to the other end of the bar to attend to someone else, and Emily sat with her drink and looked at the room. It was a Friday. The bar was doing its Friday business, not the overcrowded chaos of the hockey game night, just the regular accumulation of people at the end of a week. Some of them talking, some of them quiet, some of them doing what people do in bars, which is sit with whatever they are carrying and let it be slightly lighter for a while in the proximity of other people doing the same thing. Marcus came in 20 minutes later with Tasha, which Emily had not expected. They saw her at the counter, and there was a brief negotiation of eye contact before they came over. Tasha sat beside her with the directness of a woman who had spent 40 years not making things more complicated than they needed to be. You're back, Tasha said. Monday. Day shift? Greer asked. Tasha looked at her with the expression of someone assessing whether the new structure is going to work before committing to an opinion. Then she nodded, a single decisive movement. Good. The overnight staffing is a disaster. Someone with actual authority needs to rebuild it. A pause. I'll help if you want. I want, Emily said. Marcus was already looking around the room with the restless attention of someone 26 at a bar on a Friday, which was appropriate, and Emily let the conversation settle into the ordinary kind, the kind that did not require her to hold any weight beyond her own drink, and the question of whether she wanted a second. She did not, but she stayed for the conversation, and that was enough. Sometimes that was the whole point. Ruiz was medically cleared in December, 11 weeks after the crash. She called Emily from the base, which Emily had not expected. I wanted to say it properly, Ruiz said, not in a hospital room with a chest tube. You said it fine with the chest tube. I said make it count. That was me telling you what to do. That's not the same as saying thank you. You don't... I know I don't have to, Ruiz said. There was an edge in her voice that was not rudeness. It was precision. The same quality that had photographed a logistics order before a convoy rolled, that had negotiated credentials from a DOJ agent from a hospital bed. I'm doing it because I want to. A pause. Rhea says you're going back to the hospital. Monday. Good, Ruiz said. People who can do what you do should be somewhere they can do it, not hiding. Emily thought about the gravel road. 3 years of driving it in the dark and telling herself that invisible was the same as protected. No, she said. Not hiding. Reyes called an hour later. He was brief, as he tended to be. Heard you're starting Monday, he said. Your unit gossips quickly. Ruiz is not gossip. Ruiz is a reporting system. A pause. She's not wrong, though. About what specifically? Any of it. Another pause, longer. I'm going to be in the region until late February. Deposition prep, some installation coordination. He said this in the deliberate way of someone communicating something adjacent to the stated information. If you wanted to have a conversation that wasn't in a hospital hallway or a courthouse, I'd like that, Emily said. She heard the shift in his silence, the specific quality of relief managed without showing it, which she recognized because she managed the same thing. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she agreed. She drove the gravel road home in the dark. The same road. The same truck. The same mountains on both sides, indifferent to everything that had happened in their shadow. Inside, she put the kettle on. She took the box from the hall closet and put it back on the kitchen table and opened it this time, unpacking it item by item. Her stethoscope. A coffee mug from the hospital break room she had taken by accident 3 months earlier and never returned. A paperback she had been halfway through. A photo, the only one she kept at work. A small print tucked at the back of the locker. 3 people she had served with, taken at a forward base in a location she was not permitted to name. All of them squinting into the sun and looking slightly irritated by the camera and completely unaware of what the next 18 months would cost them. She set the photo on the kitchen windowsill. It had spent 3 years in the locker, and before that in a drawer, which was the archaeology of a person who has been trying to keep the past at a manageable distance. It could be on the windowsill now. The windowsill was not the past. It was the kitchen, which was the present, which was where she lived. She made tea. She stood at the window and looked at the mountains in the dark, which was their default state. Present, large, unafraid of being looked at. There was a thing she had believed for 7 years that she had only recently understood was wrong. She had believed that making herself smaller made her safer. That if she took up less room, occupied less space in the awareness of the people around her, kept the sealed files sealed and the history buried and the skills concealed under the surface of an ordinary life, that this was how you survived in a world that had already proven it could hurt you. What she understood now was that it didn't work that way. Not because people always see through the concealment, sometimes they don't. Not because strength is always rewarded, it frequently isn't. But because the cost of performing invisibility is not neutral. Every day you spend being less than you are is a day that costs something, and that cost is paid in the currency of the only life you have, and it compounds. She had spent 7 years at a discount on herself. The bargain had not protected her. Solt had run her name anyway. Holloway had walked into the bar anyway. The things she had tried to hide had surfaced anyway, only under circumstances she had not chosen, and in ways that had left 8 soldiers in a ditch on a mountain road and 3 years of billing fraud in a hospital where sick people had been used as a revenue mechanism. The choice to be fully what you are is not a guarantee of safety. Nothing is a guarantee of safety. But it is a refusal to participate in your own diminishment, and that refusal has a value that compounds in the opposite direction from the cost. She had saved Ruiz's life with a chest tube at the right moment. She had run triage on a highway shoulder with what she had available. She had sat in a federal conference room and given testimony that was specific and accurate and without self-protection, and that testimony had been part of what put 7 counts on Warren Steck in a courtroom in Montana. She had done all of that not despite who she was, but because of it. The skills she had spent years hiding were the same skills that had mattered when mattering was the only thing on the table. She was 34 years old. She had been many things: a soldier, a medic, a person running from a history she hadn't asked for, a trauma nurse on an overnight floor, a woman who sat at the end of a bar and watched without being watched. She was going to be a day shift senior nurse at a hospital that needed rebuilding, and she was going to help rebuild it. And she was going to run the mountain trail before dawn because she had always found it clarifying. And she was going to have Saturday conversations that were not in hospital hallways, and she was going to be, in full and without discount, the person that she actually was. It was not a redemption story. Redemption implied she had done something that required it, and she had not. It was not a triumph story either, the kind with clean edges and a final score. 3 of her people were still dead. 7 years of her life had been spent managing a wound that should have been treated as an injustice from the beginning. The corrupt officials were in custody, but the network they had operated inside would find new shapes over time because networks always do. What it was simpler and more durable than either of those framings. It was a woman deciding to stop hiding and discovering that the world did not end when she stopped. That the people who wanted to diminish her were not the final word on her value. That the work she could do when she was fully present was worth more than the safety she had purchased by making herself small. The kettle had finished and gone quiet. The tea was probably the right temperature now. She poured it and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the photo on the sill. 3 people squinting into a sun that had set years ago, all of them slightly irritated by the camera. And she felt, not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to it, the quiet, functional variety, the kind that comes not from circumstances being resolved, but from being exactly where you are, exactly as you are, without apology and without performance. She drank the tea. Monday was 4 days away. There was a trauma floor that needed rebuilding and a staffing structure that needed restructuring and a charge nurse named Tasha who had already started a list. There were patients coming in through an emergency entrance with a roof that misdirected rain. There was a military corporal with a cracked phone who had photographed a logistics order before a convoy rolled and who had trusted Emily with the photograph because Reyes trusted her, which was the kind of debt that didn't need to be repaid but could be honored by doing the work correctly and not stopping. She was not running toward any of it. She was not running from anything. She was simply going. In the direction of the work, in the direction of the people who needed what she could offer, in the direction of the life she had been keeping at arm's length for 7 years, while the mountains stood around her and waited with their particular, inexhaustible patience. The people who underestimate you are making a choice. They are choosing to see only the surface, the uniform, the quiet, the willingness to absorb without reacting. They are deciding, based on what costs them nothing to look at, that you are made of the same thing. They are always wrong. Not because strength announces itself, it usually doesn't. Not because the capable always prevail over the corrupt. They don't, not always, and the ones who tell you otherwise are selling something. But because the thing that people try to diminish when they diminish you, the competence, the history, the capacity to do what needs doing when the moment arrives, that thing does not go away because they refuse to see it. It stays. It waits. And when the moment arrives, it is exactly what it was when they looked away from it. Emily Voss set down the empty mug on the kitchen counter, turned off the light, and went to sleep in her house on the gravel road in the bottom of a Montana valley, with the photo on the windowsill and the mountains on all sides and Monday 4 days away. She was not hiding anymore. That was enough. That was in fact everything.